Welcome back. In May 2023, the former head of the Proud Boys, Enrique Tarrio, was convicted of seditious conspiracy surrounding the January 6th Capitol Hill riot. Now, Attorney General Merrick Garland said Tarrio played a central role in the effort to storm the Capitol in the hopes of preventing Joe Biden from becoming president. Tarrio was sentenced to 22 years in prison, the longest term for any of the January 6th defendants so far. Last week, Tarrio's attorney sent a letter to President-elect Donald Trump asking for a full and complete pardon. After the letter was sent, CBS News Miami's Najee Sherman spoke to Tarrio's mother, who argued her son was turned into a scapegoat.
I don't think that anybody that's actually realistic thinks that there's a doubt about the government using him, using his face, using his organization, using him as a chairman of the Proud Boys.
Trump has repeatedly refused to acknowledge that the violence occurred on January 6th or his role in fomenting it. Instead, he has referred to it as a day of love and vowed to pardon most, if not all, of the more than 1,500 people who have been charged and convicted. Tarrio's mother told CBS News Miami she expected Trump to pardon her son.
Well, as a mother, I'm extremely confident. And as an American citizen, I'm extremely confident that President Trump is going to keep his word.
Late last week, I spoke to Tarrio's attorney, Nayib Hassan, about why he believes Tarrio deserves a pardon.
Look, if you take the statements for what President Trump has stated previously, President Trump has made statements to the effect of nonviolent offenders being pardoned. And you have an individual like Enrique Tarrio, which wasn't even present on January 6th. He had been instructed by another judge to remove himself from the area and relocate himself, and he did just that. He relocated himself and went to Baltimore, and he watched the event unfold, what transpired on the January 6th. So when you take the statements of President Trump in of itself, that's one reason. A secondary reason was we think that what transpired during the trial and everything leading up to it was incorrectly done. So that's where we are right there.
Part of the pardon process, as I understand it, is there tends to need to be at least some sort of acceptance of some responsibility for your actions. What exactly does Enrique Tarrio take responsibility for anything that he did related to January 6th?
So there's different party paperwork that you normally have to file, correct? So in order to file for clemency, you normally have to file pardon paperwork, which is multiple pages, which includes letters in support and those avenues. Well, in this sort of stage we're at, we haven't received the actual documentation that's required by President Trump, by elect President Trump, to supply to the Office of Pardon. What we have in this situation, we have supplied President Trump with a letter from our office, basically explaining where our posture is with our client and what we're asking him to do, which is a full and complete pardon of our client, Enrique Tarrio.
Well, again, I just want to go back to the question. Does he take responsibility for any of his actions as it related to January 6th, or does he think that he bears no responsibility for what took place that day?
It's our posture, and it's always been our position throughout the whole trial that he doesn't bear any responsibility for what transpired on January 6th.
Now, prosecutors laid out their case during the trial, and one of the things that I think was most damning that resonated with jurors were some of the text messages and social media posts and encrypted messages that he sent to supporters. I mean, I know that at one point he said, writing on social media as the events were unfolding at the Capitol, he wrote, "Do what must be done." In the Proud Boys encrypted group chat later that day, someone asked what they should do next, and Tarrio responded, "Do it again." And then he also wrote in another message, "Make no mistake, we did this." Doesn't that suggest that he was taking responsibility? Privately, he was saying he was responsible for the actions of the Proud Boys and others in storming the Capitol.
I'm not going to take credence to the fact that what Enrique was saying was inflammatory in of itself, but as far as accepting responsibility for what transpired on January 6th, you read sort of like the cliff notes of the back end of it, right? So you're reading some of the highlight points. But in order for the government to prove their case, they need to prove that there was a plan, there was an organization, there was something there that led to the planning of what transpired on January 6th. And that's where there's a fallacy in the government's case. There was no planning. There was nothing showing any organizational structure for what happened on January 6th. Nothing whatsoever. Nothing leading up to January 6th. There was no statements. There was nothing in what you call encrypted messaging. So what you're calling encrypted messaging is what we call WhatsApp or what we call Signal, that's not really an encrypted message. We all have those same databases. I have them, you have them, and we all communicate with individuals in foreign countries with those. So it's not like if it's a private text messaging line. No, these are just not your normal Apple text that we're getting. This is just a WhatsApp messaging database.
But do it again, after the initial attack. That's pretty damning, isn't it? When he instructing people do it again.
I would not. I would agree with you that it's very inflammatory in of itself.
All right. Now, in your closing, because you handled the trial, you were part of a team that handled this trial, and in your closing, you told jurors it was Donald Trump's words, it was his motivation, it was his anger that caused what occurred on January 6th in your beautiful and amazing city. It was not Enrique Tarrio. They want to use Enrique Tarrio as a scapegoat for Donald J. Trump and those in power. Do you still believe that?
I still believe to the effect that they want to use Enrique Tarrio as a scapegoat, and that's why he was sentenced to 22 years for what transpired on January 6th. Is my perception that Donald Trump is at fault. I think his statements may have led individuals to what occurred on January 6th, but is it solely his fault? Is it sort of like the crowd rivaling up and going up to the steps? Was the crowd heated up at the very inception of that day for what was going on from the election leading up to January 6th? Absolutely, the crowd was heated up. It's much like our thought process, and I think one of my colleagues gave the statement perfectly. It's sort of like when a football team wins that championship game and everybody storms the field, or an underdog wins that one game that you have the crowd storming. That's exactly what transpired on that day.
I think comparing what happened on January 6th, in which scores of police officers were injured and hurt, to fans storming a football field and tearing down the goalposts, I want you to be clear about that, because the way it strikes me is it comes across as somewhat insensitive to and minimizing what actually occurred on January 6th.
I don't take away from the actions that happened on the front lines, correct? So my client at all times, and if you read through his colloquy where he made a statement on the day of sentencing, he basically apologizes and basically gives reflection to those officers that were on the front lines, that were impacted, those that had psychological issues as a result of it and suffer mental health issues as a result of it. We absolutely feel for those individuals that had those effects. But as far as what led up and how the effects of what transpired on that day on January 6th, I mean, you're talking about the effects of thousands of individuals within a 30-minute window going up into the Capitol, going up onto the front lines, and then thereafter breaking the multiple barriers. Because in fact, there were 3 different barriers that were set up and leading into what occurred on January 6th and going into the United States Capitol. So I don't take away from the officers, and so to this day, I still feel bad for those officers, as I basically, during our trial, told those officers and apologized for what happened to them on January 6th.
All right. I want to, what exactly would Enrique Tarrio's plans be if he were pardoned? I'm assuming he would come home here to Miami. This is where his family is. This is where he grew up. What would his plans be? Would he continue to engage in politics? Does he renounce any association with the Proud Boys going forward? I guess I'm trying to get a sense of what the future would look like for a pardoned Enrique Tarrio.
Well, Enrique Tarrio is not a part of the Proud Boys anymore. Before he even was arrested, he had already removed himself from the Proud Boys in of itself. And Enrique Tarrio going back home would be a working young man that has a bright future ahead of him. He had two businesses before him going to custody, and he'll go back to running businesses and going back to a working, productive member of society.
Do you see him as, I know a lot of people who have gone to prison during this time and come out have tried to portray themselves as martyr and tried to financially benefit from it and sort of set themselves up as continued antagonists. I'm thinking of Steve Bannon, I'm thinking of Roger Stone, I'm thinking of others. Does Enrique Tarrio see himself in that role? In other words, does he see more politics in his future, one way or the other?
Based upon what my understanding is, no, we don't see more politics out of Enrique Tarrio. What we see in Enrique Tarrio is going back to being a humble young man, trying to finish off the rest of his life being a working, productive member of society.